Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever watched someone earn something, slowly, quietly, without announcement, without the grand gesture that would have been easier to perform, while the person they were earning it from was looking in an entirely different direction? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. If you watch part 1, you know where we left Gabriel and Renee. He had collapsed at his daughter's graduation and she had caught him. She had ridden in the ambulance. She had sat in the hospital room. She had listened while he finally told her the truth about why he had left. Not the story he had been telling for 10 years, the real one. That he had been afraid of being fully known. That the man he had been was not brave enough for the love she had offered. He had said her name at his annual summit in front of 300 people. He had driven to Oakland. She had given him 40 minutes. She had not taken him back. She had told him, show up. And then she had told him something else that evening. Something he had not yet fully processed when he drove away from Oakland. She was not alone. She had been seeing someone for 7 months. His name was Marcus Webb, and Gabriel Ashford, who had spent 10 years telling himself a story about why he left, had spent the drive back to San Francisco understanding, for the first time with the full weight of it, what it meant to be too late. He was wrong about the too late part, but he would not know that for a while. Some things arrive in the wrong order. The understanding that should have come before the leaving. The honesty that should have existed inside the marriage. The showing up that should have happened during the 9 years when a little girl was waiting for it. Gabriel Ashford had gotten the order wrong. He understood this now with complete, unsparing clarity. The question that part 2 answers is not whether he understood it. The question is what he was willing to do with that understanding when the path forward was not clear, when the woman he had hurt had built a full life that did not require him, when another man was in the room, and when the only honest move available to him was the one that had no guaranteed return. This is a story about the slow, unglamorous, daily work of becoming someone worthy of a second chance, without knowing whether the second chance was ever going to arrive, and about a woman who discovered, through the specific, painful education of watching someone show her who they were not, exactly what she had been looking for all along. If you have ever had to watch someone else make a mistake that taught you something you needed to know, this story is yours. Before we begin, write "He finally showed up" in the comments if you are here for part 2. Let this family know you came back. Now, let us continue. The birthday dinner was on a Saturday evening in the 3rd week of August. Renee had reserved a table at a restaurant in Oakland that Imani had been wanting to try for months. Warm, well-lit, the kind of place that felt like a celebration without requiring anyone to perform one. Claudia was there. 2 of Imani's closest friends from college were there. And Gabriel was there. Arriving exactly on time, which Renee had noted, because Gabriel Ashford had spent the previous decade arriving when it suited him, and on time was something different. He had brought Imani a gift. He had not brought flowers for Renee. He had not brought anything for Renee. He had understood, or had decided to behave as if he understood, that tonight was not about him and Renee. It was about his daughter turning 23 in the presence of the people who had been there for her. He sat at the table. He stayed for the whole dinner. He asked Imani about her plans, her internship, the architecture firm she had interviews lined up with, the specific professional future she had been building with the same quiet, systematic determination of a young woman who had been raised by someone who finished a PhD 3 years after a divorce and built a practice from nothing. Imani answered carefully, not coldly, carefully, with the specific, measured warmth of a 23-year-old who had learned very early not to invest too much in her father's presence because presence had historically been a variable rather than a constant. She watched him across the table. She watched him listen. She watched him not reach for his phone. She did not say anything about any of this. But she watched. Marcus Webb had not come to the birthday dinner. Renee had not invited him. Not because she was hiding him. Imani knew about Marcus, had met him twice, had formed the careful, measured view of someone who had watched her mother navigate 10 years of single parenthood and was not going to endorse anyone quickly. But the birthday dinner was family. And Marcus was 7 months in, and the question of whether he was family was one that Renee had not yet answered. Gabriel had not asked about Marcus at the dinner. He had been told at the 40-minute meeting in Oakland. He had absorbed it with the specific, controlled composure of someone receiving information they do not enjoy and have no right to dispute. He had not brought it up at the dinner. He had sat at the table and talked to his daughter and listened and stayed and paid for the meal and said goodnight to Amani with a warmth that was slightly stiff at the edges, the specific stiffness of someone who is working on something they have not yet mastered. And had said to Renee, quietly, as they were leaving, "Thank you for this." She had said, it was Amani's dinner. Thank her. He had. He had driven back to San Francisco and called his therapist the following morning and said, "I need to talk about something that is going to take more than a session." His therapist had said, "I know. I have been waiting." He began showing up. Not dramatically, not with gestures or announcements. He called Amani every Sunday. Not long calls. 15 minutes, 20 at most. Not the calls of a father who was trying to repair a relationship with intensity. The calls of a father who was learning to be a regular presence through consistency rather than occasion. He asked about the architecture firm interviews. He remembered what she had told him the previous Sunday and asked follow-up questions. He was in Atlanta for a portfolio company board meeting in September, and he texted Amani. Not called, texted, which was her preferred medium of communication with him, a boundary she had established and that he honored, and said he was in town and would she like to have coffee if she had time. No pressure either way. She had time. They had coffee. It lasted an hour and 20 minutes. She told her mother afterward. He listened. The whole time. He asked questions I did not expect him to know to ask. Renee had said, "What kind of questions?" Amani had said, "About my work. About what I actually want to build. Not just, are you getting good opportunities? But, what does the built environment mean to you? What do you want your work to say?" Renee had been quiet for a moment. She had said, "Those sound like your grandfather's questions." Amani had said, "I know. I thought the same thing." Marcus Webb was 44 years old and was, on the surface of things, everything that the practical, clear-eyed version of Renee Cole's second chapter should have looked like. He was a cardiologist at a San Francisco hospital, which meant he understood, at least professionally, the specific mechanics of the heart. He was warm and attentive and had arrived in her life through a mutual friend at a dinner party where he had asked her thoughtful questions and listened to the answers, and called the following day to ask if she would like to have dinner. She had been careful. She had moved slowly. 7 months in, she had allowed herself to believe that she had been careful enough. She had not been careful about the right things. Marcus was warm in the specific way of someone who understood that warmth was the most efficient tool for building the kind of trust he needed to build. He was attentive in the specific way of someone who had learned, through several previous relationships, precisely how much attention was required to make a woman feel seen without requiring him to actually see her. He was performing a version of presence. Renee had not seen it yet because she was looking for the things she had learned to look for, the absence, the withdrawal, the specific emotional unavailability of the man she had been married to. She was watching for Gabriel's pattern. Marcus had an entirely different pattern. His pattern was not absence. His pattern was a very sophisticated version of performance. The first sign had arrived in October. Renee had mentioned, in passing, that one of her patients had been through something that had reminded her of a specific case from early in her practice, a moment of clinical memory that had stayed with her and that she wanted to write about. She was considering submitting a paper. Marcus had said, "You should." That sounds meaningful. He had said it without asking what the case was, without asking what the paper would say, without the specific curiosity of someone who found the interior life of the person they loved genuinely interesting. She had noticed. She had filed it in the category of a single instance and moved past it. The second sign had arrived in November. She had been scheduled to speak at a clinical psychology conference. A significant one, the kind she had been presenting at for several years and which represented a meaningful part of her professional identity. She had told Marcus about it 3 weeks in advance. He had said, "I will be there." The morning of the conference he had texted, "Something came up at the hospital. I am so sorry. I will make it up to you." She had stood at the podium and given her talk to 300 colleagues and had done it completely and professionally and had not let the absence affect the quality of the work. Claudia had been there. Claudia was always there. On the drive home, Claudia had said, carefully, because Claudia knew when to be careful, "How are you feeling about Marcus?" Renee had said, "I am thinking." Claudia had said, "Good. Keep thinking." The third sign had not been a sign. It had been a revelation. In December, Renee had been introduced, at a hospital fundraiser, to a woman named Andrea, a cardiologist colleague of Marcus's, warm and direct, who had looked at Renee with the specific, assessing expression of someone who was deciding whether to say something. She had decided to say something. She had said, "You are Renee Cole. Marcus has mentioned you." Renee had said, "Yes." Andrea had said, "Has he mentioned Nicole?" Renee had said, "I do not know a Nicole." Andrea's expression had shifted. The specific expression of someone who has just confirmed something they had suspected and who is now deciding, in real time, whether they are the kind of person who says the next thing. She was the kind of person who said the next thing. She said, "Nicole is someone Marcus was seeing until approximately 4 months ago. He told her it was over. I am not certain it was over." The fundraiser had continued around them. Renee had held her expression. She had said, "Thank you for telling me." She had said it with complete composure. The composure she had built across 10 years of a practice that required her to receive difficult information without collapsing under it. She had stayed at the fundraiser for 45 more minutes. She had gone home. She had sat in her kitchen for a long time. Not crying. Not yet. Just sitting with the specific, particular exhaustion of someone who had been careful and had still arrived here. She had called Claudia at 11 o'clock at night. Claudia had answered on the first ring. She had not said, "I told you so." She was not that kind of sister. She had said, "I am coming over." She had come over. Have you ever discovered the truth about someone and felt, not just the pain of it, but the specific, almost impersonal clarity of a person whose vision has just been corrected, and understood that the seeing was a gift, even though it hurt? Gabriel had not known about Marcus's situation. He had not been in contact with Renee in any way that went beyond the specifically limited terms she had established. Imani's birthday, occasional updates that came through Imani about family matters that were relevant to both of them. He had been working, not the way he had always worked, not the total immersion, everything else secondary way that had left a gap in his life where a family should have been. He had been working differently since the graduation, since the hospital, since Oakland. He had hired a therapist, not the kind you went to when you needed someone to confirm that your stress was justified. The kind who asked the questions that were not comfortable and waited while you arrived at the answers. He had been arriving at answers. The answer that cost him the most was the simplest one. He had left not because the marriage was wrong. He had left because being in it required him to be seen completely, and he had not been brave enough for that. He had left because Renee Cole, the specific, warm, precise, completely present quality of her, had been the person most likely to see him fully. And the version of himself he was carrying at 43 had not been something he was willing to be seen. He had been building, across the months since Oakland, a version of himself that he was willing to be seen. Not for her. He had understood, slowly and with the help of his therapist, that building himself for her was not the right architecture. He was building himself because the version he had been was not the one he wanted to live the rest of his life as. If Renee was ever in a position to look again, he wanted what she saw to be real. He was not building a performance. He was doing the work. He had also, in December, done something he had not told anyone about. Imani's architecture firm had given her a project, a small one, a community center renovation in Southwest Atlanta, the kind of project that a junior architect got when the firm wanted to see what they could do. The budget was tight and the timeline was realistic, and it was exactly the kind of work that Imani had told him, over coffee in September, she most wanted to do. Gabriel had not called the firm. He had not arranged a larger budget. He had not done any of the things a billionaire father does when he wants to clear the path for his child. He had simply shown up on the 2 Saturdays that Imani was doing site visits and had driven her there because her car was in the shop and had stood at the edge of the site while she worked and had asked questions about the building when she was ready to talk and had been quiet when she was not. On the 2nd Saturday, driving back, Imani had said, quietly, in the tone she used for the things she was not sure she was ready to say, "I needed someone to do that with me." He had said, "I know. I should have been the person doing it for the last 10 years. She had been quiet. He had said, "I am not asking you to forget that. I am just asking for the chance to be the person who shows up now." She had looked out the window. Then she had said, "You are going to have to keep asking. I am not going to make it easy." He had said, "I know. I am not looking for easy." She had said, "Good." They had driven the rest of the way in a silence that was different from the silences they had been sharing since June. Still careful, but warmer. Renee ended things with Marcus in January. She did it directly and without drama, the way she did everything. She told him what she knew and what she had decided, and she did not perform the ending or give it more weight than it required. She said, I deserve someone who is entirely present, and I am not going to settle for the appearance of it. He had tried to explain. She had listened. Then she had said, I believe you are sorry, and I am not interested in the sorry version of this. She had shown him to the door. She had stood in her kitchen for a while. Then she had called Imani. Imani had said, I know, Mom. Renee had said, You knew? Imani had said, I had a feeling. He looked at his phone too much when you were talking. Renee had laughed. The full one. The real one. She had said, I should have listened to you more. Imani had said, I am 23 years old. You should not be listening to me about relationships. Renee had said, You caught it. Imani had said, I catch things. A pause. Then Imani had said, carefully, in the tone she used for the things she was not sure she was ready to say, Dad has been different. Renee had been quiet. Imani had said, I am not telling you what to do. I am just telling you what I see. He shows up now. Not big. Small. He shows up for the small things. Renee had said, I know. Imani had said, that is all I am saying. Renee had said, I know, baby. She had hung up. She had sat with it. Gabriel had not called after January. He had not known about Marcus and the ending, and he had not reached out to Renee in the specific way of someone waiting for an opening. He had called Imani on Sunday as usual. He had kept the site visits. He had done the work. On a Wednesday morning in February, he was in Oakland for a portfolio company meeting, and he had texted Renee, not called, because calling felt like pressure and pressure was not what he was offering. He had said, I am in Oakland for a meeting. I will be done by noon. If you want to have lunch, I would like that. If not, I understand. She had looked at the text for a while. She had typed and deleted 3 responses. Then she had typed, noon is fine. The place on Piedmont. He had said, I know it. I will be there. They had sat across from each other in the warm noon light of the restaurant on Piedmont Avenue. It was the first time they had been alone together since the 40 minutes in Oakland in June. He had not come with an agenda. He had not come to ask for anything. He had come because she had said noon is fine, and he had understood that as the thing it was. Not a door fully open, but not closed either. They had talked. Not about the past, not about Marcus, not about what was or was not possible. They had talked the way they used to talk in the early years of the marriage, before the fear had made him start pulling back, before the pulling back had become a habit, before the habit had become a departure. About her practice. About a patient who had made progress she had not anticipated. About the architecture of the community center Imani was renovating and what Imani had said about the building's bones. He had told her about a portfolio company in Oakland that was doing work he found genuinely meaningful, a housing nonprofit whose financial model he had helped restructure so it could survive without constant fundraising pressure. She had said, that does not sound like your usual work. He had said, I have been doing some unusual work lately. She had said, why? He had said, because the usual work built something impressive, and I have been learning for about 8 months that impressive and extraordinary are not the same category. She had looked at him. He had said it without performance. She had said, you have been doing the work. He had said, yes. She had said, I can see that. He had looked at her. She had said, I am not ready to tell you what that means yet. He had said, I am not asking you to. She had said, but I am not. She had paused, and he recognized the pause because it was the same pause she had used. In June, I am not closed. He had heard it. He had not performed a reaction. He had simply said, I know. I will be there when you are. It was Imani who made the next move. Not because Renee asked her to. Not because Gabriel asked her to. On her own terms, in her own time, in the specific way that Imani Park, who had been watching both of her parents with the architect's eye for what held things together, had decided to make a move. She had asked them both to her apartment in March. Not for a dinner. For a Sunday morning. Coffee. Her kitchen. The specific, ordinary warmth of a Sunday morning that was not organized around an occasion. Gabriel had arrived first. He had brought coffee from the place on the corner. Renee had arrived 7 minutes later. She had walked into her daughter's kitchen and found her ex-husband pouring coffee with the easy, unhurried quality of someone who was not performing being comfortable, but actually was. She had set down her bag. She had said, you brought coffee. He had said, Imani said you take yours with. She had said, I know what I take mine with. He had smiled. She had smiled. Imani had appeared from the bedroom and said, with the satisfied expression of someone watching a plan arrive at its intended destination, "Good. You are both here. Sit down." They had sat at Imani's kitchen table. 3 people, 3 cups of coffee. A Sunday morning in March. Imani had talked about the community center. The renovation was nearly complete. She had pulled up photographs on her phone and passed it around and described each image with the specific, animated precision of someone who had built something and needed the people they loved to understand what it was. Gabriel had asked questions about the structural decisions. Renee had asked questions about the community's response. Imani had answered both. At some point, Imani had gotten up to get more coffee, and Gabriel had looked at Renee across the table, and she had been looking at him already, and there had been a moment, not arranged, not dramatic, just the specific, quiet moment of 2 people who were finally in the same place at the same time. He had said, "I would like to try again. If you are willing. Not the version of trying that I am capable of performing. The real version, which I am still learning." She had been quiet for a moment. She had said, "I know the difference between performing and doing the work. I have watched people do both for 20 years. He had said, "I know you can see the difference." She had said, "I can." He had said, and she had looked at him. She had said, "And you have been doing the work." He had said, "Yes." She had said, "Imani is watching from the kitchen." He had glanced toward the kitchen. Imani was very poorly pretending to be interested in the coffee maker. He had looked back at Renee. He had said, "I know. She inherited your ability to notice things while pretending not to." Something moved in Renee's expression. Not the full smile yet. The beginning of one. She had said, "One day at a time. Nothing that is not earned. And Imani comes first, always." He had said, "Always." She had said, "Then yes. We can try." Imani had come back from the kitchen at that moment with fresh coffee and the expression of someone who had heard exactly what she had hoped to hear and was not going to embarrass anyone by saying so. She had simply poured the coffee. She had sat down. She had said, "The renovation finishes in 2 weeks. I want you both there when we open the doors." They had both said yes. Gabriel Ashford had walked out on his family 10 years ago because he was afraid of being known. He had spent those 10 years building something impressive. He had collapsed on a graduation lawn, and the woman who caught him had been the one he walked out on. And in the months that followed, while she was learning who Marcus Webb actually was, while Imani was watching with her architect's eye, while the slow, unglamorous work of becoming a different person was happening in therapy offices and Sunday phone calls and Saturday site visits, Gabriel had simply shown up. Not for her at first. For himself. For his daughter. For the version of the life he wanted to live. And Renee Cole, who had caught him not because he deserved it, but because that was who she was, had watched him do the work with the full, clear-eyed attention of someone who knew the difference between the performance and the thing itself. She had known. She had waited until she was certain. And on a Sunday morning in March, in her daughter's kitchen, with coffee from the place on the corner and photographs of a community center that Imani had built, she had said yes. Not to the man he had been, to the man he had become. That was enough. That was everything. Final question for you. Have you ever watched someone do the slow, unglamorous, daily work of becoming someone different? Not for an audience, not for a deadline, but simply because who they had been was not who they wanted to be, and felt, watching it, something that was not quite forgiveness and not quite love, but something that contained both? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.